Welcome to a journey through time, a journey spanning over 3,000 years of one of humanity's most magnificent civilizations, ancient Egypt. The land of pharaohs and pyramids, of gods and gold, stands as a testament to human ingenuity, ambition, and the eternal quest for immortality. From the banks of the life-giving Nile to the endless expanse of the surrounding deserts, ancient Egypt developed a civilization so advanced, so culturally rich, that its influence echoes through the ages to our modern world. The very word Egypt evokes images of towering monuments, mysterious hieroglyphics, golden treasures, and mummies wrapped in linen, preserved for eternity. But ancient Egypt was far more than monuments and mysteries. It was a living, breathing civilization where millions of people lived, loved, worked, and dreamed across countless generations. It was a society of sophisticated government, advanced engineering, profound religious beliefs, and remarkable artistic achievement. Today, we will trace the complete arc of ancient Egyptian civilization, from its humble beginnings in scattered settlements along the Nile, through its rise to become one of the ancient world's greatest powers, to its eventual absorption into foreign empires. We will meet the pharaohs who shaped history, explore the beliefs that guided an entire civilization, and understand how the ancient Egyptians viewed life, death, and eternity. This is the story of ancient Egypt. Part 1. The Gift of the Nile. To understand ancient Egypt, we must first understand its geography. The Greek historian Herodotus famously declared that Egypt is the gift of the Nile, and truer words were never spoken. The Nile River, the longest river in the world, flows northward through the desert for over 4,000 miles before emptying into the Mediterranean Sea. In ancient times, the river's annual flooding was the heartbeat of Egyptian civilization. Each year, monsoon rains in the Ethiopian highlands would cause the Nile to swell and overflow its banks, depositing rich black silt across the floodplain. This natural fertilizer transformed a narrow strip of land on either side of the river into some of the most productive agricultural land on Earth. Without the Nile, Egypt would be nothing but desert, and indeed, just beyond the narrow greenbelt of the Nile's alley, endless sands stretched to the horizon. The ancient Egyptians called their fertile land Kemet, meaning the black land, referring to the dark, rich soil. The surrounding deserts were called Deshret, or the Red Land, a place of danger and death, but also a natural barrier that protected Egypt from invasion for much of its history. Ancient Egypt was divided into two distinct regions. Upper Egypt consisted of the long, narrow Nile Valley in the south, while Lower Egypt encompassed the broad Nile Delta in the north, where the river fans out before meeting the Mediterranean. This geographical division would play a crucial role in Egyptian history, politics, and identity. The Nile provided far more than fertile soil. It was Egypt's highway, allowing easy transportation of people, goods, and ideas. Boats could sail south against the current using the prevailing northern winds, then simply float back north with the current. This remarkable geographic advantage facilitated trade, communication, and political unity throughout Egyptian history. Part 2. The Dawn of Civilization. The Pre-Dynastic Period, 6000 to 3150 BCE. Long before the pyramids, before the pharaohs, before Egypt itself existed as a unified nation, people lived along the banks of the Nile. Archaeological evidence reveals that as early as 9000 BCE, communities were settling in places like the Fayum Depression, an oasis region southeast of what would later become Giza. These earliest Egyptians, known to us through the cultures they created, the Fayum A, the Merimde, the Badarian, and others, were learning to harness the Nile's bounty. They cultivated crops, domesticated animals, and developed increasingly sophisticated tools and pottery. Over millennia, simple reed huts gave way to more permanent structures. Stone gave way to copper. Isolated villages grew into towns. The Naqada culture, which emerged around 4000 BCE, marked a crucial turning point. Named after the archaeological site where it was first identified, Naqada culture spread throughout Upper Egypt and eventually into Lower Egypt. During this period, we see the emergence of social stratification, specialized profs, long-distance trade, and increasingly elaborate burial practices, all hallmarks of developing civilization. Archaeological excavations have revealed evidence of contact with Mesopotamia during this period. Trade routes brought new ideas, goods, and influences to Egypt. Some scholars believe these cultural exchanges may have influenced the development of Egyptian civilization, though this remains hotly debated. By around 3500 BCE, distinct kingdoms were emerging in both Upper and Lower Egypt. These proto-states competed for resources and power, occasionally making war, occasionally trading. Powerful chieftains became kings, ruling from early capitals like Hierakonpolis in the south and Budo in the north. The stage was set for one of history's most momentous events, the unification of Egypt. The early dynastic period, 3150 to 2686 BCE. Around 3150 BCE, a king from Upper Egypt accomplished what had previously seemed impossible. He united the entire land under his rule. Ancient tradition names this king as Narmer, also known as Menes, though modern scholars debate whether these were the same person or if unification was the work of several rulers over multiple generations. The Narmer Palette, a ceremonial stone carving discovered at Hierakonpolis, depicts this pivotal moment. On one side, Narmer wears the white crown of Upper Egypt while smiting an enemy. On the other side, he wears the red crown of Lower Egypt, reviewing the bodies of decapitated foes. The message is clear: one king now ruled both lands. The unification of Upper and Lower Egypt created a state of unprecedented size and power. The new capital was established at Memphis, strategically located at the boundary between the two regions, near modern Cairo. From Memphis, the early pharaohs, for now these kings could truly be called pharaohs, ruled over a realm stretching hundreds of miles along the Nile. The early dynastic period, encompassing the first and second dynasty, was a time of experimentation and consolidation. The pharaohs established the bureaucratic apparatus needed to govern a large state. A system of writing, hieroglyphics, was developed and refined. Art, architecture, and religious practices took on forms that would remain recognizable throughout Egyptian history. Royal tombs at Abydos and Saqqara grew increasingly elaborate, foreshadowing the monumental architecture to come. These early pharaohs were not yet buried beneath pyramids, but rather in underground chambers covered by rectangular mud brick structures called mastabas. Yet the early dynastic period was not without troubles. The Second Dynasty in particular seems to have been marked by internal conflict, possibly even a temporary division of the country. But by the reign of Khosakemwy, the last king of the Second Dynasty, order had been restored, and Egypt stood poised to enter its first great age. Part 3. The Pyramid Age. The Old Kingdom, circa 2686 to 2181 BCE. The Third Dynasty marks the beginning of what historians call the Old Kingdom, the age when ancient Egypt first achieved cultural and political greatness, when its architectural ambitions reached literally to the heavens. The Old Kingdom began with Pharaoh Djoser, who reigned around 2667 to 2648 BCE. Djoser's greatest legacy was his tomb, or rather, what his tomb became. Djoser's vizier and chief architect, a man named Imhotep, was tasked with creating a fitting eternal resting place for his king. Imhotep's solution was revolutionary. Instead of building a traditional mastaba, he stacked 6 progressively smaller mastabas on top of each other, creating the world's first pyramid, the Step Pyramid at Saqqara. The Step Pyramid was more than just a tomb, it was a statement. Rising approximately 200 feet high, it dominated the landscape and announced to all who saw it that Egypt had achieved something unprecedented. Imhotep's genius was so recognized that he was later deified, becoming a god of wisdom and medicine. But if Djoser and Imhotep pioneered the pyramid, it was the Fourth Dynasty that perfected it. This dynasty, ruling from approximately 2613 to 2494 BCE, produced some of the most ambitious building projects in human history. Sneferu and the evolution of the pyramid. Pharaoh Sneferu, founder of the Fourth Dynasty, was perhaps the most prolific pyramid builder of all time. Not content with a single tomb, Sneferu built at least 3 pyramids, possibly 4. His first attempt was at Meidum, where he tried to transform an existing step pyramid into a true smooth-sided pyramid. The Meidum pyramid ultimately failed, its outer casing collapsing. Undeterred, Sneferu began another pyramid at Dashur, but partway through construction, engineers realized the angle was too steep and the structure was becoming unstable. They were forced to change the angle midway, creating what we now call the bent pyramid, with its distinctive profile showing 2 different angles. Finally, Sneferu achieved his goal with the red pyramid, also at Dashur. Built at a conservative 43-degree angle, the same as the upper portion of the bent pyramid, the red pyramid was the first true smooth-sided pyramid successfully completed. At 341 feet high, it was the tallest structure in the world at the time of its completion, around 2590 BCE. Sneferu's obsessive building taught Egyptian engineers invaluable lessons about pyramid construction, lessons that would be put to use by his son and successor. Khufu and the Great Pyramid. Around 2589 BCE, Sneferu's son Khufu ascended to the throne. During his approximately 23-year reign, Khufu would oversee the construction of the most famous building in ancient Egypt, perhaps in the entire world, the Great Pyramid of Giza. The numbers associated with the Great Pyramid are staggering. Originally standing 481 feet tall, the height of a modern 40-story building, it remained the tallest man-made structure on Earth for nearly 4,000 years. The pyramid contains approximately 2.3 million blocks of limestone and granite, each weighing between 2.5 and 15 tons. The base covers 13 acres and is level within 2.1 centimeters. The sides are aligned to the cardinal directions with an accuracy of 0.15 degrees. How did the ancient Egyptians accomplish this feat? The answer involves sophisticated engineering, massive organization, and decades of labor. Contrary to popular belief perpetuated by ancient Greek historians, recent archaeological evidence strongly suggests the pyramids were not built by slaves, but by paid laborers. Workers' villages discovered near Giza revealed that these builders were skilled craftsmen and laborers who were fed, housed, and even provided medical care by the state. Limestone blocks were quarried nearby and transported to the building site using wooden sledges, rollers, and perhaps ramps. The white limestone casing stones came from Tura across the Nile, while granite for the internal chambers was floated down the river from Aswan, hundreds of miles to the south. Copper tools, wooden implements, and human muscle power were the technologies available. No wheels, no pulleys, no iron. Yet, with these simple tools, the ancient Egyptians created a monument of breathtaking precision. The Great Pyramid was not built in isolation. It was the centerpiece of a vast mortuary complex, including a valley temple, a causeway, a mortuary temple, and several smaller pyramids for queens. The entire Giza plateau was transformed into a royal necropolis during the 4th dynasty. Khafre and Menkaure. Khufu's successors continued the tradition of pyramid building at Giza. His son, Khafre, built the second pyramid at Giza, slightly smaller than his father's, but appearing taller because it stands on higher ground. Khafre's pyramid complex includes one of ancient Egypt's most iconic monuments, the Great Sphinx. The Sphinx, carved from a single massive outcrop of limestone, measures 240 feet long and 66 feet high. With the body of a lion and a human head, believed to bear Khafre's features, the Sphinx served as a guardian for the necropolis. For over 4,500 years, it has gazed eternally eastward toward the rising sun, a silent witness to the passing of empires. Khafre's successor, Menkaure, built the third and smallest of the Giza pyramids. Though less than half the size of the Great Pyramid, Menkaure's pyramid was no less carefully constructed, and parts of its lower courses were faced with red granite. The Giza pyramids represent the apex of Old Kingdom pyramid construction. Never again would Egyptian pharaohs build on such a colossal scale. The decline of the Old Kingdom. After the 4th dynasty, pyramid building continued, but on a less ambitious scale. The 5th and 6th dynasty pyramids were smaller and less carefully constructed. Royal power began a slow but steady decline. The reasons for this decline were complex. The construction of massive pyramid complexes had drained the royal treasury. The priesthood of Ra, the sun god, grew increasingly powerful, perhaps rivaling the pharaoh himself. Provincial governors, the nomarchs, grew more independent and less answerable to central authority. The reign of Pepi II, who came to the throne as a young child around 2278 BCE, marked a turning point. Ancient sources claim Pepi II reigned for 94 years, though modern scholars debate this figure, with some suggesting he ruled for 64 years. Regardless of the exact number, his exceptionally long reign seems to have weakened the monarchy. By the time he died, regional governors had become powerful enough to challenge royal authority. Within a few years of Pepi II's death, the Old Kingdom collapsed. Central government broke down. Egypt fragmented into competing power centers. The age of the pyramids was over, and Egypt entered its first dark age. Part 4. Collapse and Renewal. The First Intermediate Period, circa 2181 to 2055 BCE. The collapse of the Old Kingdom ushered in what historians call the First Intermediate Period, a time of political fragmentation, social upheaval, and chaos. For over a century, Egypt had no single ruler. Instead, competing dynasties based in different cities claimed the title of pharaoh, while powerful nomarchs ruled their provinces almost as independent kingdoms. The First Intermediate Period encompasses the 7th through 10th dynasties, though our knowledge of this era is fragmentary and confused. The 7th and 8th dynasties, based in Memphis, were short-lived and weak. Real power lay with the nomarchs, particularly those ruling the major cities of Upper Egypt. Around 2060 BCE, a new dynasty, the 9th dynasty, emerged in Heracleopolis, a city in Middle Egypt. These Heracleopolitan kings managed to assert control over much of Lower and Middle Egypt, though they never fully controlled Upper Egypt. The 10th dynasty, also based in Heracleopolis, continued this tenuous hold on power. But in the south, in the ancient city of Thebes, another power was rising. The 11th dynasty, native Theban princes, began to consolidate control over Upper Egypt. For a time, Egypt was effectively two kingdoms again, the Heracleopolitans in the north, the Thebans in the south, competing for supremacy. This period was remembered by later Egyptians as a time of suffering. Literary texts from the era describe social disorder, famine, and violence. Whether these accounts were accurate or exaggerated for effect remains debated, but they captured how Egyptians looked back on this troubled time. The First Intermediate Period was not entirely negative, however. In the absence of strong central control, there was an explosion of creativity in art and literature. Provincial styles of art flourished. Religious thought evolved, with beliefs about the afterlife becoming more democratized. No longer was eternal life the exclusive right of the pharaoh. Now, ordinary Egyptians could aspire to it as well. The Middle Kingdom, circa 2055 to 1650 BCE. The First Intermediate Period ended when a Theban pharaoh, Mentuhotep II, succeeded in defeating the Heracropolitan dynasty and reunifying Egypt around 2055 BCE. Mentuhotep II's victory marked the beginning of the Middle Kingdom, Egypt's second great age. Mentuhotep II reigned for 51 years, consolidating his control over all of Egypt. He renewed Egyptian military expeditions into Nubia and the Sinai, regions that had gained independence during the chaos of the First Intermediate Period. To emphasize his role as unifier and to bolster his legitimacy, Mentuhotep II revived the ancient concept of the pharaoh as a living god, wearing the headdresses of Amen and Min. The 11th dynasty continued for several more generations after Mentuhotep II, but around 1985 BCE, power shifted to a new dynasty, the 12th dynasty, one of ancient Egypt's most successful and stable ruling families. The 12th dynasty. The 12th dynasty began with Amenemhat I, who may have been the vizier of the last 11th dynasty king. Amenemhat I moved the capital from Thebes to a new city, Ichtawi, near the Fayum oasis in Lower Egypt. This strategic relocation placed the capital at the crossroads of Upper and Lower Egypt, facilitating control over the entire country. Amenemhat I's reign saw administrative reforms, renewed building projects, and military campaigns. He also inaugurated a practice that would become common in the 12th dynasty, co-regency. Toward the end of his reign, Amenemhat I made his son Senusret I co-regent, ensuring a smooth succession and continuity of policy. This pattern continued throughout the 12th dynasty. Each king would make his son co-regent before his death, preventing succession crises and maintaining stability. It's one reason the 12th dynasty endured for nearly 200 years. The Middle Kingdom pharaohs were prolific builders, though they generally favored smaller pyramids than their Old Kingdom predecessors. They also undertook massive irrigation and land reclamation projects, particularly in the Fayum region, transforming swampland into productive agricultural land. Middle Kingdom Egypt expanded its reach beyond its traditional borders. In Nubia, a series of massive fortresses was constructed, projecting Egyptian power deep into the south and protecting the trade routes that brought gold, ivory, and other precious goods to Egypt. The fortress of Buin, with its towering walls and sophisticated defensive architecture, could rival any medieval castle. Trade flourished during the Middle Kingdom. Egyptian expeditions reached Punt, a land somewhere on the Red Sea coast, possibly modern Somalia or Yemen, bringing back exotic goods like myrrh, frankincense, gold, and ivory. Trade with the Levant and the Aegean increased. Egyptian influence extended across the eastern Mediterranean world. The Middle Kingdom also witnessed a flowering of literature. The tale of Sinuhe, dating to this period, is considered one of the earliest historical novels. It tells the story of an Egyptian official who flees Egypt after the death of Amenemhat I, lives in exile in Syria, and eventually returns home. The text reveals much about Egyptian values, their view of foreign lands, and their deep attachment to their homeland. Another famous text, the Instructions of Amenemhat, purports to be advice given by Amenemhat I to his son, Senusret I. It warns of the loneliness of kingship, the dangers of trusting too easily, and the burdens of rule. Whether actually written by Amenemhat or composed later in his name, the text offers a fascinating glimpse into royal ideology and concerns. Religious developments during the Middle Kingdom had lasting impact. The god Amun, originally a relatively minor Theban deity, began his rise to prominence. By the end of the Middle Kingdom, Amun was increasingly associated with Ra, the sun god, as Amun-Ra, king of the gods. Thebes, Amun's cult center, would remain a major religious site for the rest of Egyptian history. Part 5. Foreign Rule and Revival. The Second Intermediate Period, 1650 to 1550 BCE. For the first time in its history, Egypt fell under foreign rule. People called the Hyksos, whose name probably means rulers of foreign lands, established control over the Nile Delta and much of Lower Egypt. The Hyksos were not invaders who conquered Egypt through military force, at least initially. They were Semitic peoples from the Levant who had been gradually migrating into Egypt for generations, settling in the eastern delta. As central authority weakened during the late Middle Kingdom, these settlers consolidated power and eventually established their own dynasty, the 15th dynasty, with their capital at Avaris in the eastern delta. Later Egyptian propaganda portrayed the Hyksos as barbaric invaders who destroyed temples and violated Egyptian traditions. The reality was more complex. The Hyksos adopted many Egyptian customs, used hieroglyphic writing, worshipped Egyptian gods alongside their own deities, and presented themselves as legitimate pharaohs. They were as much acculturated immigrants who filled a power vacuum as they were foreign conquerors. Nevertheless, the Hyksos introduced important innovations to Egypt. They brought the horse and chariot, new weapon types including composite bows, improved bronze metalworking techniques, and new musical instruments. Ironically, these military technologies would later be used by the Egyptians to expel the Hyksos themselves. During this second intermediate period, Egypt was again divided. The Hyksos controlled Lower Egypt and parts of Middle Egypt from their capital at Avaris. The 16th and 17th dynasties, native Egyptian rulers based in Thebes, controlled Upper Egypt. For a time, these states coexisted, trading and occasionally coming into conflict, but neither able to dominate the other. In Nubia, taking advantage of Egyptian weakness, the Kingdom of Kush asserted its independence and even expanded northward into Egyptian territory. Egypt was caught between foreign powers to both north and south. The War of Liberation. The 17th dynasty kings at Thebes grew increasingly hostile to Hyksos rule. They saw themselves as the legitimate rulers of all Egypt and viewed the Hyksos as usurpers occupying Egyptian soil. A series of Theban kings, Seqenenre-Tao-II, Kamose, and finally Ahmose II, launched campaigns to drive out the Hyksos. Seqenenre-Tao-II's mummy bears horrific wounds to the skull, suggesting he fell in combat. His son Kamose continued the war, pushing north and besieging Avaris itself. But it was Kamose's successor, Ahmose II, who finally completed the conquest. Ahmose II besieged Avaris, captured it, and pursued the Hyksos into southern Canaan, where he besieged and took the fortress city of Sharuhen after a 3-year siege. The Hyksos were expelled, their kingdom destroyed, and Egypt was unified once more under native rule. Ahmose II then turned south and reconquered Nubia, re-establishing Egyptian control over the gold-rich lands beyond the First Cataract. With Egypt reunified and its borders secured, Ahmose II founded a new dynasty, the 18th dynasty, and inaugurated Egypt's most glorious age, the New Kingdom. Part 6. Empire and Golden Age. The New Kingdom, c. 1550 to 1077 BCE. The New Kingdom represents the height of Egyptian power. For nearly 500 years, Egypt was not merely a regional power, but an empire, controlling territories from Nubia far to the south to Syria and the northeast. It was an age of powerful pharaohs, magnificent temples, incredible wealth, and cultural flowering. The early 18th dynasty. After Ahmose I reunified Egypt, his successors, Amenhotep I, Thutmose I, Thutmose II, consolidated royal power and expanded Egyptian influence. Thutmose I campaigned as far north as the Euphrates River, pushing Egyptian power deeper into Asia than ever before. When Thutmose II died around 1479 BCE, his widow and Thutmose III's stepmother, Hatshepsut, served as regent. But around 7 years into her stepson's reign, Hatshepsut made an unprecedented move. She declared herself pharaoh. Hatshepsut, the female pharaoh.
Hatshepsut's assumption of the kingship was remarkable. Ancient Egypt was deeply patriarchal, and the concept of a female pharaoh violated fundamental assumptions about gender and power. Yet, Hatshepsut succeeded, ruling Egypt for approximately 22 years. To legitimize her rule, Hatshepsut crafted an elaborate ideology of divine kingship. She claimed that the god Amun was her true father, presenting herself not as a woman who became king, but as someone who had always been divinely ordained to rule. In artistic representations, she often appeared wearing the traditional regalia of a male pharaoh, including the false beard. Hatshepsut's reign was marked not by military conquest, but by trade, prosperity, and building. Her most famous achievement was a trading expedition to the land of Punt, commemorated in detailed reliefs at her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahri. These reliefs show Egyptian ships loaded with myrrh trees, frankincense, gold, ivory, and exotic animals returning from Punt. Her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahri, nestled against the cliffs of the western Theban necropolis, is an architectural masterpiece. 3 terraced colonnades rise up the cliff face in perfect harmony with the landscape, representing one of ancient Egypt's most beautiful buildings. When Hatshepsut died around 1458 BCE, Thutmose III, who had been co-ruler but overshadowed by his stepmother for 2 decades, finally assumed sole power. Later in his reign, monuments bearing Hatshepsut's name and image were systematically defaced and destroyed. Whether this was revenge, an attempt to restore proper cosmic order by erasing the memory of a female king, or simply a way to claim Hatshepsut's accomplishments as his own, remains debated.
Thutmose III, the Napoleon of Egypt. Whatever Thutmose III's feelings toward his stepmother, he proved to be one of Egypt's greatest military pharaohs. Over a reign of more than 50 years, including his co-regency with Hatshepsut, Thutmose III conducted at least 17 military campaigns, creating an Egyptian empire that stretched from the Fourth Cataract of the Nile in Nubia to the Euphrates River in Syria. His first campaign, launched immediately after Hatshepsut's death, was directed against a coalition of Canaanite city-states that had allied themselves with the kingdom of Mitanni, Egypt's main rival in the Near East. The coalition's forces gathered at Megiddo, a fortress city commanding the main pass through the Carmel mountain range. Thutmose III marched north with his army, faced with 3 possible routes to Megiddo. His officers recommended the longer but safer routes. Thutmose III, however, chose the direct route through a narrow pass, a risky decision, but one that would bring his army out directly in front of Megiddo before the enemy expected them. The gamble paid off. The Egyptian army emerged from the pass, caught the enemy forces unprepared, and routed them at the Battle of Megiddo around 1457 BCE. The enemy fled into the city, which Thutmose III then besieged for 7 months before it fell. The victory broke the coalition and established Egyptian dominance over Canaan. Thutmose III's subsequent campaigns pushed Egyptian control throughout the Levant. He defeated Mitanni, crossed the Euphrates, and erected a victory stela on the river's far bank. He conquered territories throughout Syria and Palestine. Annual tribute from these conquered regions, along with gold from Nubian mines, filled Egyptian treasuries with unprecedented wealth. The spoils of empire funded massive building projects. Thutmose III expanded the Temple of Amun at Karnak,
creating the magnificent festival hall with its unusual tent-pole columns. Temples throughout Egypt were renovated or newly constructed. The wealth and power of New Kingdom Egypt reached new heights. The Amarna Revolution. The reign of Amenhotep IV, who began ruling around 1353 BCE, marks one of the most bizarre episodes in Egyptian history. In the 5th year of his reign, Amenhotep IV changed his name to Akhenaten, effective for the Aten, and proclaimed a radical religious revolution. Akhenaten promoted the worship of the Aten, the disk of the sun, as the sole god. He suppressed the traditional gods, closed their temples, and diverted their income to the Aten. He moved the capital from Thebes to a brand new city in Middle Egypt, Akhetaten, modern Tel El Amarna, built from scratch to honor the Aten. Akhenaten's revolution extended beyond religion. The art of the period broke dramatically with Egyptian tradition. Instead of the idealized formal style that had dominated Egyptian art for centuries, Amarna art depicted figures with elongated faces, thin necks, full lips, prominent bellies, and curving limbs. Akhenaten himself was shown with an almost androgynous physique. Family scenes showed the royal family in intimate, affectionate poses, unprecedented in royal art. Akhenaten's wife, Nefertiti, played an extraordinary role in the Aten cult. She appears in reliefs making offerings to the Aten alone, without the pharaoh, suggesting unusual religious authority. Her famous bust, discovered at Amarna and now in Berlin, is one of the most recognized works of ancient art. But Akhenaten's revolution was deeply unpopular. The traditional priesthood, particularly the powerful priests of Amun at Thebes, opposed the suppression of their gods. The people, devoted to gods their ancestors had worshipped for millennia, resented the forced change. Egypt's foreign empire began to crumble as Akhenaten focused on religious matters rather than defending Egyptian interests in the Near East. When Akhenaten died around 1336 BCE, the Amarna experiment died with him. His successor, possibly his son-in-law or son, Tutankhaten, was still a young boy, controlled by powerful court officials. These officials quickly moved to restore the old religious order. Tutankhaten changed his name to Tutankhamun, living image of Amun, signaling the rejection of Akhenaten's revolution. The court moved back to Thebes, Akhenaten's city was abandoned, and the traditional gods were restored. Tutankhamun. Tutankhamun himself is one of history's most famous pharaohs, yet his fame rests not on anything he accomplished during his short life, but on what he left behind. Tutankhamun died around age 18 or 19 after ruling for approximately 10 years. He was buried in a small tomb in the Valley of the Kings, the royal necropolis west of Thebes, where New Kingdom pharaohs had been buried since the reign of Thutmose I. In November 1922, British archaeologist Howard Carter discovered Tutankhamun's tomb virtually intact, with its treasures undisturbed for over 3,200 years. The discovery caused a worldwide sensation. The tomb contained thousands of objects, chariots, weapons, jewelry, furniture, clothing, and the pharaoh's mummy itself, encased in 3 nested coffins, the innermost of solid gold. The tomb's treasures offer an unprecedented glimpse into the wealth and artistry of New Kingdom Egypt. The golden burial mask, with its serene face gazing eternally forward, has become one of the world's most iconic images. Yet this tomb, hastily prepared for a minor pharaoh who died unexpectedly young, was tiny compared to the massive tombs of more powerful pharaohs. The mind boggles at what the tombs of truly great kings like Ramesses II must have contained before they were looted in antiquity. The 19th dynasty and Ramesses II. After the Amarna period, Egypt needed strong leadership to restore its prestige and power. The 18th dynasty ended with a series of short-reigned pharaohs until finally a military officer, Ramesses I, founded a new dynasty around 1295 BCE.
Ramesses I reigned only 2 years, but his son Seti I proved to be an energetic warrior king, campaigning in both Asia and Nubia. Seti I's greatest achievement was recapturing the city of Kadesh in Syria, which Egypt had lost during the Amarna period. He fought the Hittite Empire, Egypt's great rival, to a standstill, temporarily securing Egyptian interests in the Levant. But it was Seti I's son, Ramesses II, who became one of ancient Egypt's most famous pharaohs. Ramesses II, also known as Ramesses the Great, reigned for 66 years, from 1279 to 1213 BCE. He fathered dozens of children, built massive monuments throughout Egypt, and fought the most famous battle in ancient Egyptian history, the Battle of Kadesh. In 1274 BCE, the 5th year of his reign, Ramesses II launched a campaign to reconquer the territories in Syria that had slipped from Egyptian control. His target was the city of Kadesh on the Orontes River, now under Hittite control. Ramesses II led an army of about 20,000 men, divided into 4 divisions, each named after a god: Amun, Ra, Ptah, and Seth. The Hittite king, Muwatalli II, commanded perhaps 40,000 men and 3,500 chariots, the largest chariot force ever assembled in the ancient world. As the Egyptian army approached Kadesh, Ramesses II was with the lead Amun division. The other divisions followed behind at intervals. According to Egyptian accounts, captured Hittite scouts told Ramesses II that the main Hittite army was still far to the north, near Aleppo. Relieved, Ramesses made camp near Kadesh to await his other divisions. But the intelligence was false, a deliberate deception. The Hittite army was actually hidden behind Kadesh. As the 2nd Egyptian Division, Ra, approached, the Hittite chariot force suddenly attacked from ambush, catching the Ra division by complete surprise and routing it. The Hittite chariots then charged toward Ramesses' camp, where panic erupted. The Egyptian army was fragmented, cut off from its other divisions, and facing a massive Hittite assault. By all rights, the battle should have been a crushing Egyptian defeat. But Ramesses II, according to his own accounts, fought back heroically. Whether the details are propaganda or truth, it seems Ramesses personally rallied his forces and held out until reinforcements arrived. A force of Egyptian auxiliary troops, the Nearin, arrived from the coast and attacked the Hittites from the rear. The Ptah division also arrived, and together these forces managed to drive back the Hittite chariots. The battle ended inconclusively. Both sides claimed victory. Ramesses II retreated back to Egypt and never permanently held Kadesh. Yet Egyptian propaganda presented the battle as a great victory, with Ramesses single-handedly defeating the entire Hittite army. Accounts of the battle were carved on temple walls throughout Egypt, ensuring that Ramesses' victory at Kadesh would be remembered forever. 16 years later, in 1258 BCE,
Ramesses II and the Hittite king Hattusili III signed a peace treaty, the earliest surviving international peace treaty in history. Copies were inscribed in both Egyptian and Hittite languages. The treaty established a defensive alliance between the two powers, committed both to maintaining peace, and even included extradition clauses. To seal the alliance, Ramesses II married a Hittite princess. Ramesses the Builder. While famous as a warrior, Ramesses II's greatest legacy is his building program. No pharaoh built so extensively. Throughout Egypt and Nubia, Ramesses erected temples, added to existing structures, and inscribed his name on monuments, sometimes even on monuments built by his predecessors, appropriating them for himself. His most famous monuments are the temples at Abu Simbel in Nubia. Carved directly into the solid rock of the cliff face, the Great Temple features 4 colossal statues of Ramesses seated on his throne, each 67 feet tall. Inside, the temple burrows 200 feet into the mountain, with walls covered in reliefs celebrating Ramesses' achievements, particularly the Battle of Kadesh. Twice a year, on February 22nd and October 22nd, the sun's rays penetrate through the temple's entrance and illuminate the statues of Ramesses and the gods in the inner sanctuary, an astronomical and architectural marvel. When the temple was relocated in the 1960s to save it from flooding by Lake Nasser, engineers managed to preserve this solar alignment, though the dates shifted by 1 day. Ramesses also completed the hypostyle hall at Karnak, begun by his father Seti I. This massive hall contains 134 columns, arranged in 16 rows, the central columns standing 69 feet tall and 12 feet in diameter. Walking among these towering columns decorated with brightly painted reliefs and hieroglyphics must have felt like walking through a forest of stone. The Ramesseum, Ramesses' mortuary temple on the West Bank at Thebes, once contained a colossal statue of the king weighing over 1,000 tons. Though the statue now lies in ruins, it inspired Percy Bysshe Shelley's famous poem Ozymandias, with its meditation on the impermanence of earthly power. Ramesses II lived into his 90s, an extraordinary age for the ancient world. He outlived many of his sons, with his throne eventually passing to his 13th son, Merneptah. Ramesses' mummy, discovered in the royal cache at Deir el-Bahari in 1881, shows an elderly man with white hair, suffering from arthritis and dental problems, yet still bearing the proud features that his monuments display. The end of the Bronze Age. The Late Bronze Age, the period of Egyptian empire and wealth, came to a cataclysmic end around 1200 BCE. Throughout the Eastern Mediterranean, civilizations collapsed in quick succession. The Hittite Empire fell. Mycenaean Greece disintegrated. City after city throughout the Levant was destroyed. Trade routes collapsed. Literacy disappeared in some regions for centuries. Historians call this the Bronze Age collapse, and its causes remain debated. Climate change, drought, famine, internal revolts, systems collapse, and invasions by mysterious peoples called the Sea Peoples all played roles. Ramesses III met them in 2 great battles, one on land somewhere in Canaan, another in the Nile Delta itself, possibly the first major naval battle in recorded history. Egyptian accounts, recorded on the walls of Ramesses III's mortuary temple at Medinet Habu, describe the ferocity of these battles. In the naval battle, Egyptian archers on ships and on the riverbanks poured volleys of arrows into the Sea People's ships, while Egyptian vessels used grappling hooks to overturn enemy craft.
Egypt won these battles, and Ramesses III declared a great victory. But the triumph came at enormous cost. The invasions had destroyed Egypt's trading partners and tributaries in the Levant. The economic disruption was severe. Food became scarce. For the first time in Egyptian history, recorded strikes by workers demanding their rations took place. Worse was to come. Ramesses III faced a conspiracy within his own palace. His secondary wife, Tai, plotting to place her son Pentuer on the throne, organized the harem conspiracy, attempting to assassinate the pharaoh. The plot involved palace officials, military officers, and even magicians who were supposed to create wax figurines to harm the king. The conspiracy apparently succeeded in the immediate sense. Ramesses III was murdered, his throat cut, but the plotters failed to seize power. The crown prince, who would become Ramesses IV, crushed the conspiracy. Dozens of conspirators, including Prince Pentuer, were arrested, tried, and executed. Pentuer's mummy, discovered in the royal cache and dubbed the Screaming Mummy due to his contorted expression, may show evidence of being buried alive or wrapped in the skin of a sheep, a degrading burial for ancient Egyptians. The assassination of Ramesses III, the last pharaoh to campaign successfully in the Levant, marks a turning point. Egypt entered a long, slow decline from which it would never truly recover. Part 7. Fragmentation and Foreign Rule. The Third Intermediate Period, coming from 1077 to 664 BCE. After the death of Ramesses XI, the last pharaoh of the 20th dynasty in 1077 BCE, Egypt again fragmented. The Third Intermediate Period, lasting over 400 years, was marked by division, foreign rule, and the rise of powerful regional rulers. In the north, a new dynasty emerged, the 21st dynasty, based in Tanis in the eastern delta. But these pharaohs controlled only Lower Egypt. In the south, the high priests of Amun at Thebes ruled Upper Egypt almost as independent kings, creating a de facto partition of the country. Adding to the complexity, Libyan tribes had been settling in Egypt for centuries, particularly in the western delta. Around 945 BCE, a Libyan named Shoshenq I founded the 22nd dynasty, reunifying Egypt under his rule. Shoshenq I even launched a military campaign into the Levant, attacking the kingdoms of Israel and Judah, an event mentioned in the Hebrew Bible as the raid of Pharaoh Shishak. But this unity was temporary. Egypt soon fragmented again, with multiple rulers claiming the title of pharaoh simultaneously. The 23rd, 24th, and even 25th dynasties overlapped, ruling different parts of Egypt at the same time. The Nubian pharaohs. The most unexpected twist came from the south. In Nubia, which had been under Egyptian control for much of the New Kingdom, a powerful kingdom had emerged at Napata, near the Fourth Cataract. The Kingdom of Kush, as it was known, had adopted many aspects of Egyptian culture, worshipping Egyptian gods, particularly Amun, and using Egyptian artistic styles in hieroglyphic writing. Around 760 BCE, the Kushite king Pi launched a campaign northward into Egypt. Presented as a holy war to restore proper worship of Amun and drive out foreign Libyan rulers, Pi's campaign was successful. By 728 BCE, he controlled all of Egypt, establishing the 25th dynasty. The Kushite pharaohs ruled Egypt for about 75 years. They saw themselves as more Egyptian than the Egyptians, restoring ancient traditions and building pyramids in Nubia in the old style.
but their rule faced a deadly threat from the east: the Assyrian invasions. The Neo-Assyrian Empire, based in Mesopotamia, was the superpower of the 7th century BCE. Assyrian kings, with their iron weapons and a ruthlessly efficient military organization, conquered vast territories from Mesopotamia to the Mediterranean. Egypt became a target. In 671 BCE, the Assyrian king Esarhaddon invaded Egypt, defeating the Kushite pharaoh Taharka and capturing Memphis. The Assyrians withdrew but returned in 667 BCE under Ashurbanipal, who pushed even further south, sacking Thebes itself, an unprecedented humiliation for Egypt. The Kushite rulers retreated to Nubia, where their kingdom would continue for another 1,000 years, but Egypt was left under Assyrian domination, with local rulers serving as Assyrian vassals. Part 8. The Late Period. The Site Dynasty, 664 to 525 BCE. One of these Assyrian vassals, PT.2, ruler of the city of Sais in the Delta, managed to assert independence as Assyrian power waned. By 656 BCE, PT.2 had unified Egypt under his rule, founding the 26th dynasty, also known as the Site Dynasty. The Site period was a time of renaissance. PT.2 and his successors looked back to Egypt's glorious past, consciously imitating Old Kingdom and Middle Kingdom art, architecture, and texts. It was an attempt to recapture lost greatness by connecting with tradition. The Site kings were energetic builders and reformers. PT.2's son, Necho I, even attempted to dig a canal connecting the Nile to the Red Sea, a project that would have facilitated trade with the Indian Ocean. Though the canal wasn't completed, Necho also sponsored an expedition of Phoenician sailors who reportedly circumnavigated Africa, a claim that, if true, wouldn't be repeated for over 2,000 years. But the Site dynasty's independence was short-lived. To the east, a new superpower had emerged: the Persian Empire. Persian rule, 525 to 332 BCE. In 525 BCE, the Persian king Cambyses II invaded Egypt. At the Battle of Pelusium, Persian forces defeated the Egyptian army. According to later Greek sources, the Persians exploited Egyptian reverence for cats by placing cats on their shields, knowing the Egyptians would refuse to harm them. Whether this story is true or propaganda, Egypt fell to Persian rule. Egypt became a province of the Achaemenid Persian Empire, ruled by Persian satraps. Some Persian rulers, like Darius I, respected Egyptian traditions, presented themselves as pharaohs, and supported Egyptian temples. Others were less benevolent. Egyptian revolts against Persian rule erupted several times. The Egyptians briefly regained independence during the 28th, 29th, and 30th dynasties, but these native dynasties were short-lived. In 343 BCE, the Persians reconquered Egypt. Persian rule was deeply resented by the Egyptians. When a young Macedonian king arrived with his army in 332 BCE, the Egyptians welcomed him as a liberator. Part 9. The Ptolemaic period. Alexander III of Macedon, Alexander the Great, conquered the Persian Empire in one of history's most spectacular military campaigns. In 332 BCE, he entered Egypt, where he was hailed as a liberator and recognized as pharaoh. Alexander stayed in Egypt for only 6 months, but he made a lasting impact. He founded a new city on the Mediterranean coast, Alexandria, which would become one of the ancient world's greatest cities. He also made a pilgrimage to the Oracle of Amun at the Siwa Oasis in the Western Desert, where the priests declared him the son of Amun-Ra, a claim Alexander apparently took seriously. In 323 BCE, Alexander died in Babylon at age 32. His vast empire immediately began to fragment as his generals, the Diadochi, fought for control. One of these generals, Ptolemy, secured Egypt. The Ptolemaic dynasty, 305 to 30 BCE, Ptolemy I Soter initially ruled as satrap, then in 305 BCE declared himself king, founding the Ptolemaic dynasty. The Ptolemies would rule Egypt for nearly 3 centuries, the last dynasty of independent Egypt. The Ptolemies were Greek, not Egyptian. They spoke Greek, promoted Greek culture, and founded Greek-style cities. Alexandria became a center of Hellenistic culture, home to the famous Library of Alexandria and the Museion, an institution of scholarship and learning. Yet, the Ptolemies also presented themselves as Egyptian pharaohs, built temples in traditional Egyptian style, and supported Egyptian religious institutions. Egypt became a blend of Greek and Egyptian cultures, a synthesis that produced remarkable achievements in art, architecture, scholarship, and science.
Under the Ptolemies, Alexandria became one of the largest and most important cities in the ancient world. The lighthouse of Alexandria, the Pharos, was one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, guiding ships into the harbor. The Library of Alexandria attempted to collect all the world's knowledge, housing hundreds of thousands of scrolls. Scholars at the Museion made remarkable advances. Euclid wrote his Elements, the foundational text of geometry. Eratosthenes calculated the Earth's circumference with remarkable accuracy. Aristarchus proposed a heliocentric model of the solar system, 1800 years before Copernicus. The intellectual achievements of Ptolemaic Alexandria influenced Western civilization for millennia. But the Ptolemaic dynasty was also marked by court intrigue, civil wars, and the gradual encroachment of Roman power. Brothers warred against brothers, husbands against wives. The dynasty grew progressively weaker, while Rome grew stronger.
Cleopatra VII, last pharaoh of Egypt. In 51 BCE, an 18-year-old girl became Queen of Egypt. Cleopatra VII, arguably the most famous woman in ancient history, was destined to be Egypt's last pharaoh. Cleopatra ruled initially alongside her younger brother Ptolemy XIII, as was Ptolemaic custom. But brother and sister quickly came into conflict, and Cleopatra was forced into exile. She might have remained there had Julius Caesar, the most powerful man in Rome, not arrived in Alexandria in pursuit of his rival, Pompey. According to legend, Cleopatra had herself smuggled into Caesar's presence, rolled in a carpet or in a sack of bedding. Whether true or not, Cleopatra and Caesar formed a political and romantic alliance. Caesar intervened in the Egyptian civil war, defeated Ptolemy XIII, and restored Cleopatra to the throne. Cleopatra bore Caesar a son, Caesarion, whom she claimed was Caesar's heir. When Caesar was assassinated in 44 BCE, Cleopatra lost her most powerful protector, but she soon formed a new alliance, this time with Mark Antony, one of the triumvirs who controlled Rome after Caesar's death. Cleopatra and Antony's relationship became one of history's great love stories, though it was also a political alliance. Antony controlled Rome's eastern provinces. Cleopatra ruled the wealthiest kingdom in the eastern Mediterranean.
Together, they might have dominated the region. But Antony's rival, Octavian, Caesar's adopted son and heir, painted their alliance as treason. He claimed Antony had been bewitched by a foreign queen and betrayed Rome. In 31 BCE, Octavian's fleet defeated the combined forces of Antony and Cleopatra at the Battle of Actium off the coast of Greece.
Antony and Cleopatra fled back to Egypt, but there was no escape. In 30 BCE, Octavian invaded Egypt. Antony, receiving false news that Cleopatra had committed suicide, stabbed himself and died in her arms. Cleopatra, realizing that Octavian intended to parade her through Rome in his triumph, took her own life, supposedly by allowing a venomous asp to bite her. With Cleopatra's death, the Ptolemaic dynasty ended. Octavian annexed Egypt as a Roman province. For the first time in 3,000 years, Egypt had no pharaoh. Part 10. Legacy and Epilogue. Roman Egypt, 30 BCE to 395 CE. Egypt became the personal property of the Roman emperors who styled themselves as pharaohs but ruled from Rome. Egypt's vast wealth, particularly its grain production, fed the city of Rome and financed the empire. But Egypt itself became a backwater, a resource to be exploited rather than a civilization in its own right. Traditional Egyptian religion continued for centuries under Roman rule. Temples were still maintained, festivals celebrated, hieroglyphics written, but gradually the old ways faded. Christianity spread through Egypt beginning in the 1st century CE. By the 4th century, most Egyptians were Christian. The old gods were abandoned, their temples closed, and sometimes destroyed or converted into churches. The last hieroglyphic inscription was carved in 394 CE at the Temple of Philae. With that final inscription, the ancient Egyptian language, which had been written continuously for over 3,500 years, fell silent. The ability to read hieroglyphics was lost, and ancient Egypt became a mystery. For more than 1,400 years, the monuments of ancient Egypt stood as silent enigmas. Travelers and scholars could see the pyramids, temples, and tombs, could observe the strange picture writing covering their walls, but could not read what they said. Ancient Egypt became a land of legends and speculation. Then, in 1799, French soldiers under Napoleon discovered a stone near the town of Rosetta in the Nile Delta. The Rosetta Stone bore the same text in 3 scripts: Greek, Demotic, Late Egyptian, and hieroglyphics. This provided the key needed to decipher the ancient Egyptian language. In 1822, the French scholar Jean-François Champollion finally cracked the code. Hieroglyphics could be read again. Ancient Egypt, silent for so long, could once more speak to humanity. The contributions of ancient Egypt. Ancient Egypt's legacy to world civilization is immense. Egyptian achievements in architecture, engineering, mathematics, medicine, art, and governance influenced cultures throughout the ancient world and continue to influence us today. The pyramids demonstrated engineering capabilities that stretched the limits of what was technologically possible. The precise measurements, astronomical alignments, and sheer scale of Egyptian monuments remain impressive even in our age of advanced technology. Egyptian medicine was among the most advanced in the ancient world. Texts like the Edwin Smith Papyrus describe surgical procedures, anatomical observations, and treatments that show remarkable medical knowledge.
The ancient Egyptians understood that the heart was central to blood circulation, performed surgery, set bones, and created prosthetics. Egyptian mathematics developed practical geometry and calculation methods needed for surveying, construction, and administration. The development of a 365-day calendar divided into 12 months forms the basis of our modern calendar. Egyptian art, with its distinctive style and symbolism, influenced Greek and Roman art, which in turn shaped all of Western art history. The concept of monumental stone architecture, temples, palaces, and tombs built to last for eternity has its roots in ancient Egypt.
Egyptian religious concepts, particularly beliefs about the afterlife, judgment, and resurrection, influenced later religious traditions. The idea of a judgment after death, where one's soul is weighed against the standard of truth and justice, appears in Egyptian belief centuries before similar concepts in other religions. Perhaps most importantly, ancient Egypt gave us an example of a civilization that endured. For 3,000 years, a span of time almost incomprehensible to us, Egyptian civilization maintained its cultural identity, its religious beliefs, its artistic traditions. Fashions changed, dynasties rose and fell, foreign rulers came and went, but the essential character of Egyptian civilization remained recognizable from the early dynastic period to the Roman era. The enduring fascination. Why does ancient Egypt continue to fascinate us? Perhaps because it was a civilization that succeeded in its ultimate goal, immortality. The pharaohs are long dead, yet we still speak their names. The gods are no longer worshipped, yet we still see their images. The people who built the pyramids are dust, yet their monuments endure. Ancient Egypt represents humanity's defiance of death and oblivion. In their elaborate burial practices, their massive monuments, their careful preservation of the dead, the ancient Egyptians were fighting against the inevitable, the erasure of memory, the dissolution of the self, the victory of chaos over order. And in a sense, they won. Because of their obsession with eternity, because they built in stone rather than wood, because they preserved their dead and recorded their deeds, ancient Egypt survived. We can look upon the face of Tutankhamun, read the words of Ramesses II, walk through the temples of Hatshepsut, and stand in awe before the pyramids of Giza. The ancient Egyptians built for eternity and achieved it. Their civilization may have ended, but their legacy is immortal. In museums around the world and the monuments still standing in Egypt, and the influence they had on subsequent cultures, ancient Egypt lives on. Conclusion. From the first settlements along the Nile to the death of Cleopatra, ancient Egyptian civilization endured for over 3,000 years. It survived invasions, civil wars, famines, and foreign rule. It produced some of humanity's greatest architectural achievements, most beautiful art, most sophisticated early government systems, and most elaborate religious beliefs. We have journeyed together through this vast span of time. We have seen Egypt unified under Narmer, watched the pyramids rise under Khufu, witnessed empire under Thutmose III, revolution under Akhenaten, and grandeur under Ramesses II. We have seen Egypt fall to Assyrians, Persians, Greeks, and finally Romans. We have seen a civilization rise, flourish, decline, and fall, yet never truly die. Ancient Egypt is more than history. It is a testament to what human beings can achieve when vision, organization, and resources combine.
It is a window into a worldview profoundly different from our own, yet recognizably human in its hopes, fears, and dreams. It is a reminder that greatness is possible, that civilizations can endure, and that the works of humanity can indeed last forever. The ancient Egyptians believed that to speak the name of the dead was to make them live again. By studying their history, visiting their monuments, and telling their stories, we fulfill that belief. Ancient Egypt lives on, in our imagination, in our culture, and in the eternal monuments they left behind. Thank you for joining me on this journey through 3,000 years of ancient Egyptian history. Though our time together has ended, the story of ancient Egypt continues, waiting for each new generation to discover its wonders, decode its mysteries, and stand in awe before the achievements of one of humanity's greatest civilizations. This is ancient Egypt. This is their story. This is their immortality.